What happens when you meet the when you tax the rich and raise the minimum wage? This over Weinickel on the Daily Coast staff posting this. Walter Einickel. He says when Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton. Now keep in mind, Mark Dayton is a billionaire. He's an heir to the Target fortune, Target, the retail store. When he took office in 2011, you remember Tim Pawlenty, the Republican, had been the governor, and he had presidential aspirations, so he was cutting taxes, and he was cutting back on services, and a bridge fell down, and people died, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. When Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton took office in 2011, Minnesota had more than a $6 billion deficit and an unemployment rate of 7%. This is 2011, right? This isn't like, the year of the crash, 2008. This is years later. Today, Minnesota's unemployment rate is below 4%, and they have a budget surplus of $1.2 billion. Now, how did they get there? Did they do what the Republicans say, what our last Republican caller said, just cut taxes and cut spending, everything will be fine? No. No country, no state has ever cut its way to prosperity. You cannot name one. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. Instead, during his first 4 years in office, Governor Dayton raised the state income tax from 7.85% to 9.85% on individuals earning over $150,000 and couples earning over $250,000 when filing jointly. There's a $2.1 billion tax increase in Minnesota. He also agreed to raise the minimum wage in Minnesota to $9.50 an hour by 2018, and he passed a state law guaranteeing equal pay for women. Between 2011 and today, in 2015, Governor Dayton, this is just in 4 years, Governor Dayton has added 172,000 new jobs to Minnesota's economy. That's 165,000 more jobs in his first term than Tim Pawlenty added in both terms combined. Even though Minnesota's income tax rate is the fourth highest in the country, it has the fifth lowest unemployment rate in the country at 3.6%. Dayton also created an online voter registration system, so it's easier for people to register to vote. Whereas Republicans want to make it harder for people to vote. The other morning, I forget where I was, but Morning Joe was on. And Joe was going off on this. I guess he lives in Connecticut or wants to move to Connecticut or something. And Connecticut is talking about raising their taxes like Mark Dayton did in Minnesota. And he's like, this is crazy. Raise the income taxes. You don't want to raise property or whatever tax it was there. You don't want to do that. People are going to flee the state. No, what happens, California raised taxes, right? When Schwarzenegger left, California was a disaster. It was a basket case. It was billions of dollars in debt. Jerry Brown comes in. The first thing he does is he raises taxes on rich people and puts the state back in order. And jobs are growing like crazy in California, just like they are in Minnesota. Whereas you've got states like Louisiana, where Bobby Jindal has been cutting taxes, or Wisconsin, where Scott Walker cut taxes, and now they're billions of dollars in debt, and they're hemorrhaging jobs. So why is it that when you raise taxes, it actually improves the economy? I mean, within certain reasonable bounds. And by the way, we're talking about raising taxes on people making over $250,000 a year in their household. Why is it that that improves the state? Well, it's really simple. People want to move someplace where there's a decent quality of life. If you had a choice between moving to, say, Somalia, where there's no income tax and no services, or moving to Germany, where the income tax can be 54%, but hey, you get free college, you get free health care, you get, it's extraordinary. And the public transportation system is insanely good. Which would you choose? If you had a choice, there's a piece in the New York Times yesterday about how Texas is starting, the so-called economic miracle, Rick Perry's economic miracle in Texas. Turns out all it was the price of oil was high enough that the oil industry in Texas was, making out like bandits. And now that the price of oil is low, Texas is collapsing. They cut taxes, and now they can't afford to pay for things. When you increase taxes, you have the revenue to produce the infrastructure, to produce the quality of life that causes people to want to live there. Right? If you've got good schools in your community, people want to live there. If you've got a well-funded fire department, people want to live there. If you've got a highly professional police department, well-paid and well-managed, people want to live there. If you've got streets and street signs and the most heavily zoned city in the United States is Portland, Oregon. I lived there for 5 years. That's how I know. It is arguably the most European city in the United States. You have to have if you're going to build anything, you have to have, there has to be a certain, walking distance to a store, walking distance to housing. Everything is mixed use. There has to be a certain amount of green space for all the developed area. There's parks everywhere. And the taxes are fairly high. So why is it that everybody wants to move to Portland? I mean, one of my kids just bought a house in Portland. I'm watching the housing prices. I mean, they're just like, phew. Why? Because people want to move there. Because those taxes pay for services. They pay for the things that people want. The Republican strategy is cut the taxes and cut the services. Let the churches take care of the homeless people, right? Rather than the government saying, okay, we'll provide you with free health care. We'll provide you with mental health services. We'll get you off the streets. Let the philanthropists provide for the schools. Let people pay for private schools. No, sorry. The way it works is people want a high quality of life, and they're willing to pay for it. And this stupidity, this just outright stupidity of Reaganomics, this stupid idea that if you cut taxes, you're going to increase government revenue, that if you cut services, you're going to somehow increase the quality of life, when in fact, if you cut services, what you're doing is you're decreasing the quality of life for people. Now, obviously, government shouldn't be providing all services. I'm talking about the commons. I'm talking about fire, police, schools, hospitals, things like that. I don't want the government making my blue jeans. I'm not a Marxist. I do think that regulated capitalism is a very, very highly functional economic system. We've largely abandoned it since 1980 and gone with laissez-faire capitalism, which is what Herbert Hoover, was the last president to preside over in 1929. It was what Harding was elected on in 1920. Cut taxes and privatize. He dropped the top tax rate from 91% to 25%, and he deregulated, much of the government, and he privatized much of the government in 1921. And guess what? It brought us the Great Crash. Republican strategy, this idea that is pushed, these guys are just shills for rich people. Because really all they're saying is cut the taxes on the rich, and somehow it'll all trickle down. I'm sorry. We're being peed on by the rich and being told it's raining. We're being turned into a nation of peons. A terrible thing.